Hi, I'm State Representative Mitch Greenlick, representing House District 33, Northwest Portland and Washington County, and I'm very happy to be here today to introduce this group of folks who, all of whom support House Joint Resolution 1. House Joint Resolution 1 refers to the voters a amendment to the Constitution that prohibits the use of capital punishment in the state of Oregon. This is my 6th term in the House, and from my very first term when I ran against the death penalty, I've been waiting for somebody to bring this conversation to the public. Our governor did exactly that, asking us to have a conversation, and I'm delighted to have him as a supporter for House Joint Resolution 1. I support this bill for moral and political and economic reasons, all of which you'll hear about from the folks behind me. But I want to take a moment to read a paragraph from the governor's letter, which he will make available as of this press conference, and will be introducing as testimony in the hearing in the House Judiciary Committee that begins at 1. Governor Kitzhaber said, Oregonians have a fundamental belief in fairness and justice, in swift and certain justice. But Oregon's death penalty is neither fair nor just, neither swift nor certain, and it is not applied equally with the circumstances of the crime and the finding of a jury. Basically, it's time for us to have a conversation once again on the death penalty. I urge our members in the House to take this up and to move it quickly, and then we'll be urging the voters of Oregon to pass HJR 1 and eliminate the death penalty from Oregon's laws. Senator Shields.
Thank you, Representative Greenlick. My name is Chip Shields. I represent North and Northeast Portland in the Oregon State Senate. And I'm here to offer my support for House Joint Resolution 1, tell you a few reasons why, but then in a moment I will also read some testimony from former Representative Patrick Sheehan, a Republican who represented House District 51 in prior legislative sessions. A true life sentence for a life taken. A life sentence for a life taken. That's what HJR 1 is all about. And as the former subcommittee chair and co-chair of the Public Safety Subcommittee, I saw that Oregon spends a whole lot of money trying to put people to death, but I think there's more to public safety than investing millions of dollars in the death penalty. Ending the death penalty would save millions in taxpayer dollars that could be better spent on solving crimes, Life in prison is a severe sentence that costs far less than the death penalty. Capital punishment costs far more than life imprisonment because of special death row housing and legal fees, kind of the super due process that taking a life requires. Meanwhile, a huge percentage of rape and murder cases go unsolved because of a lack of resources. Representative Sheehan sent his testimony along to me and to Representative Greenlick, former Representative Sheehan. He says, I apologize, I won't be able to make the hearing, but want to submit this testimony. Please include this into the record for Tuesday's hearing. And I'll just summarize a couple of paragraphs. The rest of his testimony will be presented in the House Judiciary Committee. Chair Barker, Vice Chairs Krieger, Garrett, and members of the committee, Representative Sheehan says, Oregon's death penalty is an extraordinarily expensive mechanism to support an antiquated gesture that no longer performs on the intent of the law. Since 1864, Oregon has reversed course on the death penalty 7 times. It is time to consider it again. Today, Oregon's death penalty contains 10 sequential state and federal appeals, each forcing the families of victims to relive the horrors of the crimes over and over, while allowing the most deviant criminals in our correctional system to amuse themselves with expensive legal processes. And again, this is former Representative Sheehan. In conclusion, he says, I understand and agree with the desire to convey in the most certain terms our disdain for these vile criminals and punish them to the full extent of the law. I believe that full extent should make death row inmates die in obscurity after a life of reflection behind bars, not commanding media attention with the circus of legal proceedings. It's time to replace Oregon's death penalty. A life sentence for a life taken. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Jeff Ellis. I'm here today on behalf of Oregonians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty and the Oregon Criminal Defense Lawyers Association. I'm the director of the Oregon Capital Resource Center. It's not the headline from the May 1989 edition of the Register Guard from Eugene that catches your attention. The headline read, $2 million paid to settle suit. And the story was about the $2 million that Springfield paid to Eric Proctor and Christopher Boots, two young men who were wrongfully convicted of murder, two young men who were convicted and sentenced to life in prison for a murder that they didn't commit. But it's not the headline that catches your attention. It's what was said on the side, in the side column. The lawyer said, imagine if we'd had the death penalty at the time that this crime was committed, they might be dead by now. Because you see, Christopher Boots and Eric Proctor were prosecuted for a crime committed in 1983 during a short period of time when Oregon had eliminated the death penalty because it had been declared unconstitutional. It was only a short year later that we replaced the death penalty, reinstated it here in Oregon, but we didn't know at that time that these two young men had been wrongfully convicted of a murder that they didn't do. They had gone into a 7-Eleven at night and didn't see anybody there. And later, one man returned and found the victim dead in a cooler. And he quickly became a suspect in the case. And because he and his friend had entered earlier, they both became suspects. And they were convicted based on evidence that people thought was solid. There wasn't any question about their guilt at the time of the conviction. Forensic evidence had proved that they were guilty. There was high-velocity blood spatter on their shirts, which could have only come from killing the victim. And the fingerprint that the defense attorney said, when you learn whose fingerprint that is, you will know the name of the killer. The fingerprint the prosecutor attributed to simply somebody touching something. In fact, in closing argument, he demonstrated by touching a glass and putting a piece of tape on the glass and pulling it off and said, you see, I touched the glass, and now my fingerprint is on that tape. And so it's an innocent person's fingerprint on that tape. When DNA was conducted years later and they found the real killer, Mary Ann Bearden, who's now a judge in Eugene, was proved absolutely right. But nobody had doubts at the time that they were prosecuted. Can we execute innocent people here in Oregon? Yes. I've practiced in Oregon and I've practiced in Texas, and I'm here to tell you that there is only one difference between the two states. Texas is actively executing people. If Oregon begins to actively execute people, we will make a mistake, and an innocent person will be executed. There is, however, one way to guarantee that that never happens, which is to remove the death penalty. You can't give Christopher Boots and Eric Proctor their time back, and certainly money doesn't heal all their wounds. But if the death penalty had existed for what the prosecutor called this certain cold-blooded murder, then Oregon might have executed two innocent men. And only by eliminating the death penalty can we guarantee that that doesn't happen. And for that reason, I'm speaking today in support of House Joint Resolution 1 and asking the opportunity for the citizens of the state of Oregon to vote again on whether they want to keep the death penalty or whether they want to replace it with a better alternative.
My name is Frank Thompson. I'm a former superintendent of the Oregon State Penitentiary. I was administrator of that facility during the times that the first two executions, at the time in over 36 years, had taken place. I have taken a position to assist the efforts to have the death penalty in Oregon repealed for a number of reasons, three of which I'll attempt to cover in my testimony today. One is which I feel that the death penalty is a failed public policy because it cannot be shown to deter crime. Secondly, I do not believe the government ought to be a part of any public policy that cannot be shown to work. Data and research overwhelmingly shows that it cannot be shown to work. I believe that for government to promote such a failed public policy requiring decent men and women to take the lives of a human being in the name of a public policy that cannot be shown to work is indefensible. And another point that I want to cover in my testimony before the judiciary today is the death penalty is not necessary in helping to run safe and secure institutions. Administrators, prison administrators throughout the country know how to run safe and fundamentally sound prisons if given proper staffing, adequate resources, programs, classification systems that will assist the administration in providing the housing and the supervision that will take care of the security risks that various levels of inmates pose, and given the kinds of facilities where you can house inmates without an overcrowded condition that creates an insecure environment. Those are some of the reasons that I'll be attempting to testify for promoting the repeal of capital punishment in the state of Oregon.
My name is Dan Bryant. I actually attempted to stop one of those two executions that Mr. Thompson just referred to. And I'm here wearing two hats. One as a representative of Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, of which I'm a past president and currently serve as the co-chair of the Public Policy Committee. And Ecumenical Ministry of Oregon has had a long-standing position in opposition to the death penalty, and it was in that capacity as co-chair of the Public Policy Committee in 1996 when I and other religious leaders of the state met with the governor to ask him to stay the execution of Douglas Wright. And our group spoke for nearly 30 minutes on that day of our reasons of why we oppose the death penalty. And throughout that meeting, the governor remained silent and the execution proceeded. And that governor, of course, was John Kitzhaber. And 16 years later, Governor Kitzhaber ended his silence on the topic. Little could I have known then that 2 years later, my own mother would be murdered brutally in a home just miles from my own in Eugene. No one knows the pain of losing a loved one like those families who have been through a murder. It is sudden, it is brutal, it is unnatural. It rips your inside right out of you and leaves a hole that may grow smaller in time, but it never goes away. 5 years later, her killer died while under the care of the state hospital. His death did nothing to bring closure, relief, or any sense of justice to me and my family. To the contrary, he died just after I had picked up forms to apply for permission to visit him. I longed to know what he could tell me of those last 6 hours of my mother's life after I had seen her, as she tried to help him deal with his mental illness before he lost his senses and stabbed to death one person he always said that he trusted and loved his entire life, for my mother was his aunt. So why do I remain opposed to the death penalty? The raw facts should be disturbing to anyone, and I'll cite just three. 141 people on death row exonerated with evidence of their innocence in this country since 1973. African Americans more than twice as likely to be executed as Caucasians. The cost of execution, already referred to, up to 10 times the cost of life in prison. Historically, Christian teaching has held that capital punishment should only be used as a last resort to defend the good of society. And today, the reverse is true. In an era of declining public resources for basic human services, education, and public safety, capital punishment has become a detriment to the good of society, wasting scant public resources for a questionable purpose. Given our imperfect judicial system, racial bias in the system, and the cost of implementation, continued use of capital punishment is not only illogical, it is immoral. It is for these and many other reasons that denominations, including my own, plus American Baptists, Lutherans, Presbyterians, Methodists, Quakers, Mennonites, Unitarians, Jews, Catholics, and many more, have all gone on record as opposing capital punishment. And I've passed out statements from many of those organizations. If you didn't get a copy, I'd be glad to share that with you. I'm thankful that our family never had to face the horror of the death penalty for mother's killer. Why? Because my faith opposes the taking of human life, because nothing can be gained by adding to death, because you can fight evil with evil, but you can never win, because only good can overcome evil, because love is stronger than hate, forgiveness is better than anger, because we add nothing to life by adding more to acts of death, because Mom literally gave her life to help her killer. I know she would want us to choose life for all and death for no one. So I urge the support of this bill to repeal the death penalty.
My name is Jules Bailey. I have the honor of representing House District 42. I'm grateful to Governor Kitzhaber for starting this conversation and to Representative Greenlick and others for continuing it. I just have a brief statement that summarizes much of what we've heard here today. It's clear that the death penalty does not make Oregonians safer. For higher costs, we get worse outcomes, and it degrades our humanity. We can do better than this as Oregonians, and we can do better for Oregonians by imposing a life sentence for a life taken. And I support repealing Oregon's death penalty law. Thank you.
I'm Michael Dembro, and I represent House District 45, that's Northeast Portland to Park Rose. And I, too, want to thank the Governor and Representative Greenlick for taking leadership on this issue. And I look forward to bringing this question to the people. And I believe that once the people see the evidence, the facts that you've heard this morning, from the speakers, they will vote to end the death penalty. And I say that because I myself came to my position in opposition to the death penalty thanks to my students. That's where I have gained much of my knowledge in my life from my students. I teach college. And back in the 90s, I was myself kind of divided on this issue of the death penalty. And I had my students do a research project on the death penalty at that time. And these students, I will say, there were about 25 of them, and I would say the great majority of them supported the death penalty until they started doing their research projects in which they convinced themselves and one another and me, ultimately, that the death penalty does not achieve what it purports to achieve. It does not bring solace to the families of the victims. It does not save the state money. It does not deter crime. It does not do all of those things, as I said, that it purports to do. And in fact, what they discovered from their research, looking at the evidence in Oregon, in other states, and around the world, is exactly what you've heard from the speakers this morning. And my hope is that we will be able to go out there and make that case to the people, and they will vote to abolish the death penalty, to change the Constitution, and bring this practice at last to an end.
Chief, you want to join me here? Are there any questions we can answer for you?
One of the issues that Senator Shields brought up was cost. Actually, a number of people have brought up cost. Do you have any estimates on how much it costs here in Oregon?
We've asked the Department of Justice to look at that. I don't know because it's hard to get a definitive answer because they don't break the hourly rates down by attorneys. I can tell you that it's upwards of $6 million per biennium.
And what does that include?
Would be about right.
That's the difference between having somebody on death penalty on death row with their appeals and having them in the general population with life without parole.
And so I'm sorry, is it, so largely legal costs?
Yes, in the super due process that taking a life requires, the added precautions in police investigations, et cetera. And Jeff, would you like to comment about that?
You know, we haven't studied costs here in Oregon, which is one of the problems, but we are able to determine defense costs. And if you assume essentially that all of the other costs, the prosecution, police, administration of the court, cost roughly the same, we have spent in Oregon $200 million over the last decade and produced exactly 0 executions.
Question for Mr. Ellis.
Jeff?
You said that if Oregon begins to actively execute people, we will make a mistake. Yet there's also been mentioned the super due process, and I mean the track record is people aren't being executed, at least aside from the 2 that volunteered, so to speak. I mean, what would it actually take to actually begin actively executing people in Oregon? Why is that a concern?
Well, over time, we will start executing people here in Oregon. We have 37 people on death row right now, and every state that has the death penalty eventually begins to execute. I oftentimes hear, let's just cut away at some of the costs by cutting away at the process. And certainly if we did that, then the headline in the Register Guard would not have read Springfield settles suit for $2 million. It would have said Oregon killed 2 innocent men. You know, the faster we move, if we want to move like Texas, we can. But what we're going to do is we're going to execute innocent people. We've executed about 1,300 people in the United States since we reinstated the death penalty in the mid-1970s. During that same period of time, over 140 have been executed. That means there's a 1 to 10 ratio. For every 10 people that have been executed, there is 1 person who is innocent. There is nothing to suggest that Oregon's any different. We didn't put into place any special laws to prohibit wrongful convictions after Mr. Boots and Mr. Proctor were exonerated. In fact, prosecutors routinely argue in post-conviction the one opportunity in Oregon to put new facts before a court to claim that you're innocent. Prosecutors routinely argue and win this argument that innocence is not a claim that can be brought in post-conviction. There is no such thing as actual innocence in Oregon.
Is there evidence that that this would pass? I mean, have you done polling? Do you know what the pulse of the public is on this issue?
There's all sorts of polling. I think from looking at data that I've seen from a variety of sources, this bill would have a very good chance of passing.
What kind of chance? Numbers?
I don't have numbers.
But and I mean, there's sort of 2 questions. I mean, there's the will it pass the legislature question, and will
Okay,
it
that's
pass...
the first. I was answering the second question.
Yeah, well, what
I don't
about-
have polling on the legislature yet.
Well, I mean, you have a hearing, but what's your
I'm
expectation?
hoping it will pass the legislature. We haven't done any vote counts on it. We have both the House and the Senate to deal with. I'm hopeful, but I don't have any information. The information that I've looked at from here and other places lead me to believe that right now, if you just ask Oregon citizens, would you favor abolishing the death penalty or not, that a majority of Oregon citizens right now say yes to that question. That doesn't talk about the complexities of a campaign, how much money you have to run a campaign, what the opposition is. I mean, that becomes a very important calculation. But the governor has charged us to have this conversation with the people, and HJR 1 is a vehicle that will allow us to have that conversation.
Do you expect that this will make it to the 2014 ballot? I mean,
I am
it sounds
hopeful
like,
that it will make it to the 2014 ballot.
do you think it's too soon? I mean, just kind of looking at what happened in California, that voters rejected that by a pretty large margin. Is that...
Other states it's passed, and now I've been here 6 terms. I don't know how much longer I can wait. I expect to be in the legislature till I'm 100, but I'm not certain of that. So this is my opportunity to move it, and I don't know why 14 would be better than 16. I do know when I asked the governor if he was running again, would he have a problem with it being on the ballot with him running, and his answer was if he runs again, he's going to have to deal with his death penalty stance anyway. He might as well have something specific on the ballot to deal with. But you need to ask him about that. Okay, well, thank you all very much. We'll all be doing a reprise of this act at 1 o'clock in room 343, I think, the House Judiciary Committee. Thank you for being here, and thank you all guys for